Thank you for illuminating talk. I'm going to keep you on the creation story, and if you don't mind, because we know this editing that was done, there was the purpose for the editing. Can you give us your thoughts about the difference in the story of creation, especially pertaining to man, from the first chapter, which is very godlike, by a word, and to the second one, which is more like a fatherly type of creation? Is it the selling point? What was the reason for this type of editing to put the two together, one after the
Well,
other?
I think, the more cynical, what you call criticisms of the Bible and the religious tradition, criticisms like Marx's or Freud's even for that matter, make the case that it's a manifestation of power in politics. And that there's always a political or economic motivation behind the construction of the stories. And I think that that's true to some degree. But I don't think that it's true enough so that you can take that particular interpretive tack and be done with it. And I would say that to the degree that there are political and economic motivations that have shaped the stories, the fact that multiple stories have come together, they're sort of corrective in some sense. And so even if at the level of detail, there's political intrigue and politics, say with regards to the ascendancy of Israel, when you step away from it, it becomes something that's more universal and escapes from that. And how that happened, I don't know. I mean, I think it's safe to say, it's reasonably safe to say that the people who put this document together, they did two things. I think they were guided by their aesthetic taste and their conscience. I truly believe that. And the reason I believe that is because I think anything that was propagandistic would have been forgotten. Because you can't remember propaganda. No one likes it. It's like it's dead 10 years after you write it, or 20 years. And it isn't only that these books were assembled and written, it was that they were preserved and remembered. And to me, that means they have an affinity with the structure of memory. I mean, you think about it. How does a story last 10,000 years unless it's the kind of story you can remember? It doesn't. Because you forget all the forgettable stuff, and all you remember is the memorable stuff. And so there's this interplay between the document itself and its audience that shapes the document. And so, now I don't know how specifically I answered your question. We're going to hit these different stories as they come up in sequence, and I think I'll shed some more light on the relationship between them doing that. And we'll start with that next week. Okay. Okay, so I think I'm going to take 4 more questions only because I'm running out of brain and I don't want to say stupid things or stupider things than I've already said. So.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. In the beginning of your lecture, you talked about how society needed this kind of dreamlike religious base so we don't go between left and right violently and we can kind of have this base. And then you also said you admired Nietzsche for kind of chopping down these ideological and kind of dogmatic weeds coming up from the base of Christianity. I was wondering what your thoughts are on how society can have this kind of religious base without having these kind of dangerous ideologies that can spring up once in a while.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. No, really, I mean, that's the serious answer to that question. I mean, the reason that I'm an admirer of Nietzsche is because he was the spirit of his times. That's a good way of thinking about it. It's not like Nietzsche killed God. It's that Nietzsche gathered what was in the air and articulated it, right? Incredibly profoundly. And so he put his finger on the spot. And in doing so, he announced the problem. And once you announce the problem, then maybe you can come up with a solution, because you can't solve a problem unless you know what it is. And the fact that he made it so stark and so clear was horrifying in some sense, but at least we know where we stand. And so, since then, and I would say particularly in many ways, particularly with the work of Jung and everything that's come out of that, which is a deeper study of mythology and its meanings, we've been trying to address the issue that Nietzsche brought up and trying to solve the problem. And the problem is something like the reunification of the spirit of mankind. It's something like that. Well, we're slogging through it, man, and that's that's why you're all here, at least in part. So we'll see how far we can get. At this rate, we'll get to like the 12th verse in the first. But that's the aim, you know. Okay. Yes, they'll be in the video. I could also make them available as slides. Yeah, well that's okay. I'll return to this when we get going again. So.
Also, the image of the hyperlink. Do the colors have any significance?
Yeah, different colors represent the distance between the cross references. Yeah.
Is the Holy Spirit the same as the Logos?
Well, I'll talk about that more next time. I mean, I think that the best answer to that is I'll talk more about that next time. I mean, I think of them as overlapping metaphorical domains. You know, in the descriptions I put of the fatherly aspect, the son aspect, and the spirit aspect, you could swap a lot of those. You know, it's kind of arbitrary, but I think the Trinitarian idea is trying to get forward the notion that the locus of the divine it's the same thing in its essence, but it exists in a multiplicity. It exists as the spirit of tradition. It exists as the living individual in time and space, and then it exists as the spirit and as consciousness, something like that we all share. Which you know, Jung would have thought about that as something like the capacity for the individual to realize the tragedy and redemption of Christ in their individual life. And that's something like your capacity to voluntarily accept the tragic conditions of your existence and to move forward to something resembling paradise regardless of that. You know, as something that's intrinsic to you. And I think that's associated with the idea of the Pentecost and the Holy Spirit, all of that. So that's as good as I can do in a short period of time. So, thank you. Yep. I think it's because of the gap between what we articulate and what we don't know. Something has to fill that gap. Like I think the law could replace it if the law was total, but it isn't. It's bounded and incorrect, and there's something, it has to rest on something inside that's like this mediator between what we articulate and what we don't understand. It's something like custom, it's something like expectation. It's something like the intrinsic sense of justice, you know, that the law itself is aiming at. And those aren't fully articulated, but without them there'd be no grounding. Like, without the body, the law would be a dictionary. You know, and if you don't know what a word means, using the dictionary is helpful, but not that helpful, because, like, unless you've had the experience of anger, the dictionary can't tell you what anger means. It just refers to other words. But the words themselves refer to something else. And the law refers to something else. And without that, it has to be in tune with that something else and has to be in accordance with it. And so I don't think we can ever delineate the proper body of laws. And that's also why like ideological utopias, see, the ideological utopias dispense with the transcendent. They say, this is what we need to do. It's like, no, you don't know. That's not good. You have to leave space for what you kind of know and for what you don't know. And I mean, you know, in the story of the Tower of Babel, human beings make this massive building that's supposed to reach up to the heavens so that it'll take the place of God. Well, that's the earliest warning we have of the danger of making things so big that you confuse them with God. And God gets irritated and comes down and makes everybody speak different languages and scatters them. It's like, well, that's what happens when you try to make something a totality, is that it starts to fragment inside and disintegrates into catastrophe. And so it's almost as if we have to maintain this articulated space inside the dream, inside the custom, something like that, because otherwise it doesn't work. And I think that's the same as having respect for the fact that we have bodies. You know, we're not just abstract creatures that follow rules. We're not that at all. We only follow certain rules. We won't follow the other ones, and our societies will crumble. And so, we just don't know enough to articulate the entire landscape of behavior with articulated rules. Not at all. We can't do it. It's beyond us. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for watching this video. This is the Archangel 911. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. Have a nice day.